Most people believe their power is taken by someone stronger, louder, or more aggressive. But power is rarely stolen in dramatic confrontations. It is surrendered quietly through emotional exposure. Every time you react too quickly, explain too much, or reveal your fears before you have mastered them, you are not being authentic, you are becoming readable. And the moment someone can read you, they can move you. History has always rewarded those who control perception, and even thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli understood that power does not shift during conflict. It shifts when predictability replaces mystery. Today, you will understand how influence quietly erodes, not through attack, but through exposure, and how you can protect your authority without becoming cold, distant, or fake. Because real power is not silence, it is selective expression. Power rarely collapses in a dramatic confrontation. It erodes quietly through emotional visibility that feels harmless in the moment, but slowly reshapes how others perceive you. Most people believe authority is lost when someone stronger attacks them, outperforms them, or openly challenges them. Yet in reality, influence weakens long before open conflict ever appears. It weakens when reactions become predictable, when frustration becomes visible, when insecurity is processed publicly instead of privately, and when emotional turbulence is displayed before it has been mastered internally. We live in a culture that glorifies transparency and encourages people to share struggles in real time, to expose doubts as proof of authenticity, and to equate immediate emotional expression with strength. While selective vulnerability can deepen connection in safe and trusted environments, uncontrolled exposure quietly reduces psychological positioning because perception, not intention, determines authority. When you speak about a challenge you are still emotionally inside of, your tone carries uncertainty, your language reveals instability, and subtle microsignals, hesitation, defensive phrasing, over-explanation, communicate that your internal state is unsettled. Even if people respond with empathy, their subconscious recalibrates how stable you appear under pressure. Authority is not built on perfection, but on steadiness, and steadiness signals reliability, leadership, and control. When emotional turbulence becomes visible too often, others begin adjusting their expectations of you. They may still respect your talent, but they hesitate to rely on your composure, and this hesitation slowly shifts influence away from you. Strategic individuals understand that emotions must be processed before they are presented. They feel deeply but regulate privately, allowing confusion to transform into clarity before speaking publicly, so that when they finally communicate, their words carry resolution instead of volatility. There is a profound difference between sharing a lesson extracted from difficulty and broadcasting confusion while still searching for balance, because the first communicates growth, while the second communicates instability, and instability becomes information. In competitive or high-stakes environments, information is leverage. Every visible insecurity, every defensive reaction, every moment of emotional imbalance becomes data that can be observed, remembered, and later applied with precision. Not everyone will misuse that information, but some will, and those who operate strategically do not need to attack you directly once they understand your pressure points. They only need to apply subtle stimuli in the right place. When criticism consistently triggers defensiveness, criticism becomes a tool. When exclusion produces anxiety, distance becomes leverage. When praise creates compliance, flattery becomes influence. Predictable emotional patterns reduce resistance, and reduced resistance increases control. Emotional visibility also affects long-term authority through accumulation. Small visible reactions repeated over time form a psychological image, and that image shapes how seriously others take your decisions. Stability builds influence gradually, and instability erodes it gradually. Neither happens overnight, but both are powerful in repetition. Emotional discipline, therefore, is not suppression, but containment, not coldness, but calibration. It is the ability to pause before responding, to separate internal processing from external presentation, and to decide deliberately what deserves expression. When you do not immediately react, observers cannot accurately measure your internal state, and when they cannot measure it, they cannot calculate how to move you. Uncertainty forms around you, and uncertainty increases perceived strength because what cannot be easily read cannot be easily managed. Every visible reaction carries a psychological cost, and if your emotional state shifts with every comment, disagreement, or minor pressure, others subconsciously register that you are externally driven rather than internally anchored. By contrast, when your emotional baseline remains steady and your reactions are rare, those reactions carry weight. They feel intentional rather than impulsive, and intention commands respect. Modern narratives often encourage instant expression, say exactly how you feel right now, but maturity requires filtration, discernment, and timing. Not every emotion deserves public articulation, and not every internal struggle needs external validation. Even thinkers such as Niccolò Machiavelli recognized that perception governs power, and that influence depends not only on who you are, but on what others are allowed to see, because controlled visibility strengthens authority, while uncontrolled exposure invites management. The objective is not to become distant or inauthentic, but to create layers, to reveal insight rather than chaos, to communicate stability rather than turbulence, and to ensure that when you speak, your presence signals composure. Power does not vanish in loud explosions. It fades in subtle exposures. One defensive tone, one visible frustration, one public confession made before clarity. And over time, these moments accumulate into a reputation that others respond to instinctively. When you control what you reveal, when you choose timing intentionally, and when you process privately before presenting publicly, your psychological positioning strengthens, your presence feels grounded, and your influence expands, because the less accurately others can map your emotional landscape, the less capable they are of steering your direction. Predictability is the quiet beginning of control, because human beings are constantly studying patterns, even when they are not consciously aware of doing so. And the moment your emotional and behavioral responses become consistent in a way that can be anticipated, you stop being influential and start being manageable. Most people assume control happens through dominance, aggression, or visible power plays, but in reality, control often emerges from observation. Someone watches how you react to criticism, how you respond to delays, how you behave when ignored, how you handle praise, and from those repeated observations, a psychological blueprint forms.
Once that blueprint is clear, influence no longer requires confrontation because your responses can be triggered with precision. If mild criticism reliably makes you defensive, criticism becomes a lever. If exclusion creates visible anxiety, distance becomes a tool. If praise softens your boundaries, flattery becomes a strategy. This is not paranoia, it is behavioral psychology, because predictable emotional reactions reduce uncertainty for others, and when uncertainty disappears, manipulation becomes easier. Emotional consistency in values is strength, but emotional consistency in uncontrolled reactions is vulnerability. There is a crucial difference between being principled and being predictable. When your triggers are obvious, others no longer need to challenge you openly. They simply apply small, calculated pressures that steer your behavior in subtle ways. The danger is that most reactions are automatic. They feel justified, natural, even necessary in the moment, yet each automatic reaction reveals data. A tightened jaw during disagreement, a rushed explanation after critique, a visible shift in tone when feeling disrespected, these micro-signals communicate where your emotional boundaries are thin. Strategic individuals pay attention to those signals because they reveal leverage points. And once leverage points are identified, control becomes efficient and quiet. True strength is not emotional suppression, but emotional unpredictability in reaction timing. It is the ability to pause long enough that your response cannot be easily anticipated. When someone makes a subtle, provocative remark and you remain composed rather than immediately defending yourself, you interrupt their attempt to measure you. When you choose silence instead of reflexive explanation, you create uncertainty. When you respond calmly where intensity was expected, you destabilize the psychological advantage of the other person. Uncertainty protects power because what cannot be accurately predicted cannot be easily managed. Many people believe that strong reactions demonstrate confidence, but frequent visible reactions often demonstrate sensitivity. The more easily your emotional state shifts, the more externally influenced you appear. By contrast, when your emotional baseline remains steady across different environments, praise, criticism, pressure, competition, people begin to perceive you as internally anchored rather than externally reactive. Internally anchored individuals are difficult to push, difficult to provoke, and difficult to guide unintentionally because their behavior is chosen rather than triggered. Another overlooked aspect of predictability is routine communication patterns. If you always over-explain when challenged, others learn that pushing slightly will make you justify yourself at length, exposing even more of your internal reasoning. If you always seek reassurance when uncertain, others learn that withholding reassurance increases your dependence. If you always try to immediately repair tension, others learn that creating small amounts of tension grants them influence over you. In each case, your predictable attempt to stabilize the situation gives someone else psychological leverage. This does not mean you must become erratic or inconsistent in values. Unpredictability in principle destroys trust, but unpredictability in emotional reaction protects authority. The key lies in deliberate response rather than impulsive reaction. Deliberate response introduces space between stimulus and behavior, and in that space, control exists. When someone cannot immediately categorize how you will respond, they hesitate. That hesitation reduces their confidence in manipulating the interaction. Over time, this composure builds a reputation. People begin to say that you are calm under pressure, hard to read, steady in conflict. That reputation itself becomes protective because individuals are less likely to test someone who does not provide emotional feedback easily. Emotional feedback is currency in social dynamics. When you visibly react, you pay. When you remain measured, you conserve. Conserved emotional energy accumulates into authority. Even subtle environments like workplaces operate on this principle. The person who reacts to every minor critique is perceived differently from the person who listens, pauses, and responds briefly. The latter appears grounded, and grounded presence discourages unnecessary provocation. Over time, predictability narrows your range of movement because others feel confident they understand you. Unpredictability, when controlled and calm, expands your range because others are unsure how far they can push. Ultimately, the goal is not secrecy for its own sake, but strategic ambiguity in reaction. When your values are clear but your emotional triggers are not easily mapped, you retain autonomy. When your responses are intentional rather than automatic, you become difficult to steer. And when you become difficult to steer, you become difficult to control. Because power does not only belong to the strongest person in the room, it belongs to the person whose internal state cannot be easily predicted or manipulated. Over-explaining is one of the most subtle ways people surrender authority because it disguises itself as clarity while quietly signaling doubt. And the more you feel the need to justify your decisions, the more you communicate that your position depends on approval rather than certainty. Many individuals believe that detailed reasoning automatically increases respect, so when they make a choice, set a boundary, or give direction, they add layers of explanation, background context, repeated reassurance, and defensive clarification in an effort to prevent disagreement. What they do not realize is that excessive explanation shifts the psychological frame of the interaction. Instead of presenting a settled decision, they present an argument that appears open for evaluation. The moment your tone sounds like you are trying to convince rather than declare, perception changes. Others begin to sense hesitation, even if your logic is sound, because authority is not measured by how much you say, but by how firmly you stand behind what you say. When you continue speaking long after your point is clear, you unintentionally reveal that resistance affects you. And once people notice that resistance triggers more explanation, they learn that questioning you produces leverage. Over time, this dynamic transforms conversations into subtle power negotiations. Instead of respecting direction, others probe your reasoning, searching for weaknesses, alternatives, or inconsistencies. The discussion moves from outcome to analysis, and analysis invites challenge. Clear authority functions differently. It offers necessary context, but stops before it becomes self-defense. It recognizes that not every disagreement requires detailed persuasion, and that brevity often communicates stronger conviction than elaboration. There is also a deeper psychological layer to over-explaining. When you articulate every internal thought process, you expose your uncertainties, priorities, and pressure points. You reveal which objections you anticipated, which risks worried you most, and which outcomes you fear. That information, while shared in the name of transparency, becomes strategic data. In competitive environments, strategic observers do not focus on what you decided, they study why you struggled to decide and where your confidence wavered. Over time, they begin applying pressure precisely where your explanations once lingered. Another consequence of excessive justification is the erosion of decisiveness. When others grow accustomed to long explanations, they subconsciously begin expecting them. If one day you state something briefly and move on, they feel unsettled and demand elaboration, as though your authority now requires validation through detail.
In this way, over-explaining trains people to believe your decisions are negotiable. Strong communicators, by contrast, separate clarity from approval. They communicate direction in a composed, contained manner, offering sufficient reasoning to demonstrate thoughtfulness, but withholding the impulse to defend unnecessarily. This balance preserves dignity and discourages endless debate. Brevity signals internal certainty because it implies that the decision has already been examined privately and does not require external reinforcement. Repetition, on the other hand, often signals doubt. The more you restate the same reasoning, the more it appears you are attempting to convince yourself as much as others. Another hidden effect of over-explaining is emotional exposure. When you feel misunderstood and rush to clarify repeatedly, you reveal how strongly perception affects you. If mild disagreement leads to lengthy justification, others learn that disagreement unsettles you. Once that pattern is visible, subtle pushback becomes a tool to destabilize your composure. By contrast, when you respond to disagreement calmly and concisely, clarifying once and then moving forward, you communicate that your internal state remains steady, regardless of external noise. This steadiness discourages further testing because there is no visible reward in pressing further. It is important to distinguish between thoughtful communication and defensive elaboration. Thoughtful communication is structured, intentional, and proportionate to the situation. Defensive elaboration is reactive, emotionally charged, and excessive relative to what is required. The first strengthens authority, the second weakens it. In leadership, professional settings, and even personal relationships, direction carries more weight when it is delivered with calm finality rather than extended persuasion. When you speak clearly and then allow silence to follow, that silence reinforces the stability of your position. Silence after clarity suggests that the matter is settled. Continuous talking suggests that the matter remains open. Ultimately, influence depends on perceived confidence, and perceived confidence is shaped not by the volume of explanation, but by the restraint within it. When you discipline your communication, limit unnecessary justification, and resist the urge to seek agreement through repetition, your presence shifts. People begin to treat your words as deliberate rather than negotiable. They listen more closely because you speak less often. They challenge less frequently because they sense that pushback will not produce emotional spillover. In this way, controlled brevity becomes protective. You are not withholding information out of arrogance. You are preserving positioning through precision. And over time, precision transforms how others respond to you. Because when your words are measured and contained, your authority feels grounded. And grounded authority is far more difficult to undermine than authority that constantly explains itself. Emotional predictability is another vulnerability that strategic individuals quietly observe, because once someone's emotional reactions become consistent and visible, those reactions can be anticipated, influenced, and sometimes manipulated without overt confrontation. Most people believe authenticity requires expressing every feeling openly and immediately. So when they feel frustrated, disappointed, excited, or insecure, their tone, body language, and pacing shift in obvious ways. While emotional awareness is healthy, uncontrolled emotional transparency in competitive environments reduces strategic flexibility. If others can accurately predict what will irritate you, impress you, intimidate you, or pressure you, they can design interactions around those triggers. For example, if mild criticism reliably causes you to defend yourself at length, criticism becomes a tool to consume your time and focus. If urgency reliably makes you rush decisions, artificial deadlines become leverage. If praise reliably softens your boundaries, flattery becomes influence. Emotional predictability creates patterns, and patterns are exploitable because they allow others to plan responses before you even speak. Strategic composure does not mean suppressing emotion, it means regulating its visibility and timing. There is a difference between feeling something and displaying it instantly. When your reactions are delayed, measured, and proportionate, you disrupt predictability. Others cannot easily determine which tactic will provoke which response, and uncertainty protects you. This is why high-level negotiators and disciplined leaders maintain consistent tone even when conversations intensify. Their steadiness forces others to rely on logic rather than psychological triggers. Another overlooked consequence of emotional transparency is negotiation disadvantage. When you reveal how badly you want an outcome, how personally you take disagreement, or how anxious you feel under pressure, you unintentionally signal urgency. Urgency weakens leverage because it communicates that time and outcome matter more to you than to the other party. Once that imbalance is perceived, negotiations tilt. Conversely, when your emotional state appears stable regardless of progress, you project optionality. Optionality strengthens leverage because it implies that you can walk away if necessary. Emotional regulation therefore functions as a strategic asset, not merely a personality trait. It also influences respect. People often equate calmness under pressure with competence because steadiness suggests preparation and internal order. When someone reacts dramatically to minor resistance, observers subconsciously question their resilience. They wonder how that person will respond when stakes increase. Emotional volatility can overshadow technical skill because instability introduces risk. In professional environments especially, reliability of temperament often determines trust more than raw intelligence. Furthermore, visible emotional swings create leadership gaps. When a group senses that their direction depends on the leader's mood, stability disappears. Team members begin adjusting behavior to manage the leader's emotions rather than focusing on objectives. Energy shifts from productivity to mood monitoring. Strategic individuals avoid this dynamic by keeping their emotional baseline consistent. They may feel pressure internally, but externally they maintain measured responses, which preserves focus and discourages manipulation. Another subtle danger lies in oversharing personal frustrations. Venting in the wrong context can expose vulnerabilities that later resurface during conflict. What feels like harmless transparency today may become ammunition tomorrow. This does not mean living guarded and disconnected. It means choosing environments wisely and understanding that not every space is neutral. Discernment is protection. Emotional discipline also affects decision-making quality. Strong emotions narrow perspective. When you react immediately, you operate from the most intense interpretation of the situation. Delaying visible reaction creates cognitive space. That space allows you to evaluate whether the issue truly deserves escalation or whether silence and recalibration would yield better outcomes. Often the most powerful move is not an immediate response, but a controlled pause that signals you are not easily provoked. Over time, when people realize that attempts to trigger you produce no dramatic reaction, they reduce those attempts. The incentive disappears. Emotional unpredictability, when rooted in calm rather than chaos, becomes protective because others cannot script your responses. They cannot predict which pressure point will move you, and therefore they default to straightforward interaction. Strategic composure is not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It is about mastering expression so that it serves your objectives rather than undermines them. When your emotional displays are intentional rather than automatic, you regain control of pacing. You choose when to intensify, when to soften, when to remain neutral, and when to disengage. That control reshapes how others approach you. They become more measured, more respectful, and more cautious because they sense that emotional tactics will not easily sway you. Ultimately, power in social dynamics often belongs to the individual who is hardest to destabilize. The less reactive you appear, the more stable your presence feels. And stability creates psychological gravity. Others begin aligning with it, not because you dominate loudly, but because you are anchored. When you remove emotional predictability as a tool others can use against you, you elevate your influence quietly. You move from being a participant reacting to circumstances to being a steady center around which circumstances must adjust. Giving access too quickly is one of the most underestimated ways people weaken their influence, because every interaction carries a psychological economy, and when personal time, attention, or inner thoughts are shared without discernment, the balance of power subtly shifts. Most individuals confuse rapid disclosure with connection, believing that immediate openness builds trust, intimacy, and authenticity. They reveal histories, fears, ambitions, or private experiences within the first moments of acquaintance, assuming that sharing emotional content accelerates bonding. While it may create the illusion of closeness, it often sacrifices strategic positioning because influence is proportional to scarcity and effort. When access is too easily granted, it feels ordinary rather than meaningful. Real trust and authority are built through gradual observation and layered disclosure. Strategic individuals understand that depth is earned, not broadcast, and that patience in revealing personal or emotional dimensions ensures that each layer of access carries value. Rapid access also exposes untested vulnerabilities. Early-stage interactions seldom reveal character fully because people are naturally controlling their behavior and presenting idealized versions of themselves. Disclosing sensitive information before patterns of reliability are visible creates asymmetry. You may feel understood, but the other party's deeper tendencies, pressures, and motivations remain hidden. That imbalance increases their leverage because they know you better than you know them. Gradual disclosure allows observation first, judgment second, and engagement only after sufficient evidence of trustworthiness emerges. This approach protects both emotional energy and psychological position. Another danger of early access is misinterpreted intensity. Long conversations, emotional sharing, or dramatic anecdotes may feel intimate, but they can be misleading. Someone who seems deeply connected may only be performing consistency in controlled scenarios, and if access is given before stress, disagreement, or inconvenience arise, the true character of the other person remains untested. Strategic patience ensures that deeper trust follows demonstrated stability rather than surface emotion. Access is a form of influence, and influence should never be surrendered in a single moment. By controlling timing and layering personal disclosure, you signal that closeness is conditional and intentional, not automatic. This protects boundaries while maintaining warmth. Additionally, fast access can distort value perception. When personal information and emotional openness are offered immediately, they lose impact. The human mind attributes significance based on effort, observation, and earned trust. Information that is given without challenge is often treated lightly, and those who receive it may unconsciously take liberties, testing boundaries or using insights against you later. Gradual sharing, by contrast, creates progressive trust, where each additional layer reinforces perception of thoughtfulness, self-control, and measured openness. It also prevents others from developing shortcuts for manipulation. If your thoughts, vulnerabilities, and priorities are revealed slowly, observers cannot construct an immediate map of leverage points. Strategic individuals also distinguish between emotional availability and exposure. Being warm, engaged, and approachable does not require immediate intimacy. They create environments where trust must be earned, and access is granted based on demonstrated reliability, consistency, and discretion. This approach minimizes the risk of being managed through psychological insight alone. Furthermore, early access encourages projection. When someone knows your inner world before testing circumstances, they may unconsciously adjust their behavior to exploit your openness, consciously or unconsciously pushing boundaries, applying subtle pressure, or engineering situations that reveal even more. Layered disclosure mitigates these risks, giving you control over pacing and limiting what others can exploit. Emotional and cognitive boundaries are preserved because disclosure follows observation. Real influence comes not from how much you share at once, but from how selectively, deliberately, and consistently you reveal your inner world. Over time, this disciplined approach transforms interactions. Those who initially sought to influence you through understanding your vulnerabilities find fewer opportunities to do so because they have limited insight. Conversely, people respect your composure, patience, and timing, and they calibrate their own behavior accordingly. Balanced access ensures that psychological leverage remains symmetrical. You understand others while revealing yourself in measured increments, so no one holds disproportionate advantage. Another overlooked effect of slow, layered access is clarity in relationship dynamics. When people are forced to demonstrate consistency and reliability over time, you acquire precise knowledge about their incentives, tendencies, and character. With that knowledge, you can decide when deeper disclosure is appropriate, whom to trust, and how to position influence. Strategic patience in access is both protective and empowering. It prevents unnecessary vulnerability, cultivates respect, and ensures that your emotional and informational resources are not exploited prematurely. It also reinforces perception of value. When information is scarce, its impact increases. When access is controlled, your presence feels intentional, your insights feel significant, and your influence is magnified. This method preserves integrity, warmth, and authenticity while maintaining authority, because you are not withholding out of fear, but revealing with intention. By contrast, immediate disclosure communicates untested dependency. When others know your struggles, priorities, or ambitions too soon, they may unconsciously manipulate or pressure you based on that knowledge. Layered disclosure neutralizes that risk by controlling what is visible and when, making you psychologically robust without becoming distant. In essence, the timing of access dictates the distribution of influence. Share too soon, and you empower others beyond earned trust. Share gradually, and you preserve authority while cultivating connection. Strategic individuals use this principle to maintain balance in professional, social, and personal environments, ensuring that emotional openness amplifies influence rather than diminishes it. They reveal themselves in layers, each carefully timed to correspond with demonstrated reliability and each calibrated to strengthen trust without compromising authority. Over time, this practice creates a reputation of deliberate transparency, emotional intelligence, and disciplined presence. Those who interact with you learn that access is intentional, that insights are granted selectively, and that influence is earned rather than assumed. This disciplined approach to giving access transforms the dynamics of every relationship. It safeguards emotional energy, protects psychological positioning, and maximizes the impact of your communication. When you reveal in layers, your presence commands attention, your words carry weight, and your influence is preserved because others cannot leverage knowledge they have not yet earned. The strongest individuals are not those who share most quickly, but those who reveal thoughtfully, observing before exposing, granting access gradually, and always controlling the timing and context of disclosure. This mastery of layered access is the cornerstone of strategic influence and long-term authority.